And trust me, as much as like the Talmud says, as much as the calf wants to suckle, the cow wants to give its milk. I think that everybody here who's seeing one another wants to see all of you online as well. And again, so Jay, I was anticipating a text, an onslaught of text about this. The rationale is based on security questions, security issues. And if you'd like to bring that up with our security people, you're more than welcome. We look forward to having more and more experts who are in the room who understand why security works the way it does. Tell us at this moment how to safeguard and protect our people as best as possible. But according to our security people, there's still a risk for us having screens on and having cameras on, a risk of being Zoom hijacked. Now, again, there might be somebody who are in the room or in the Zoom who are going to tell us after Shabbos that we're wrong and it doesn't make sense and it's rationale. I trust me that we're trying our best. Nobody here wants to have your cameras off. This is the best information we have at this moment. If you'd like to discuss it, I'm sure Jeff, again, as I said earlier, I'm sure Jeff and the rest of the team who are advising us at this moment will be happy to set up a call for best practices. Nobody here, again, wants you to have your camera off. In fact, Davka, for the last couple of years since we started Zoom, we've been begging people to put their cameras on. We'd like to see your faces, but at this moment, right, that's what we've been told. And it's frustrating for all of us. Even this morning, Gil had mentioned to us, Gil sent an email to us, a text saying, the regulars, what about the regulars, people that we know, and so on. So I'm thankfully not involved. Okay, Jay, okay, great. So let's have this conversation during the week, everybody, as we're trying our best to teach Torah right now, and we know that it's frustrating and it's less than ideal, but we look forward to hearing your voices when we open it up for people to weigh in and if we're wrong, then we'll be wrong, and hopefully you'll forgive us for this minor trespass that was done in our zealousness to protect our Zoom space and our shul space at this moment. Okay, so with that being said, I just want to say, just reminded me of a Torah. There's a Torah that says that Modeh Ani Lefanecha, and I've said this in the shul a couple of times. Modeh Ani Lefanecha is the first thing that we say in the morning. We give thanks to you, God. Modeh means to be grateful, but there's also a usage of that term Modeh, which means to admit that you're wrong. In the Gemara, in the Talmud, whenever somebody wanted to say that they were wrong, they'd say Modeh, or that would be Yiddish. Say Modim Chachamim Rabbi Meir. Modeh means to say you're right. And so one Rebbe said that we preemptively tell God as we begin the day that whatever happens today, you're right, and we're not going to fight with you. And so I wanted to say, Modeh Ani Lefanecha, you're right, and I'm wrong, but I hope that you'll forgive us as we go into the week, and we'll do our best to make sense of the ever-changing landscape that is happening in real time, so that we can best safeguard all of you and all the people online. So let's begin with Bechot Torah. Jill, if you do us the honor, that'd be awesome. Okay, ready, everybody?
Yeah.
Baruch
Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekitzanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'asok b'divrei Torah.
May the words of Torah be sweet today and help illuminate the way forward. You share my screen, which does this thing where it darkens for some reason, but the screen. Okay. Last night, I began last night's sermon, or in the middle of the sermon, I spoke about the tension between the particular and the universal in our tradition. And one of the ways that one of the most beautiful, I think, framings of that tension was Rav Kook, the great Rav Kook, Abraham Isaac HaKohen Kook, who was born in 1865 and passed away in 1935. He was the first chief rabbi of pre-mandate Palestine. He was a genius, and he was a universalist, and he was a particularist, and he has been used and misused by every imaginable Jewish camp because of his the largesse of his uvra and also the breadth of his soul. And he wrote a piece called the Shir HaMirubah, the song that is a fourfold song, which is not here, but I'll just say it to you in brief. I'll paraphrase it. He says, Yesh Bisharet Shir Atzmo, there's a person who sings the song of the self. And in singing the song of the self, he finds the song of the self to comfort or to express the soul's needs. And then there's one who sings the song of the nation. And then there's a song that sings the song of humanity as a whole. And then there's one who sings the song of creation itself. And then there's one who sings the song that includes all of the songs. And that poem, which was based on the Zohar from the 13th century, and also for those who study a little of Jewish mysticism, it's based on the four worlds, and then the fifth world being the world of Adam Kadmon, and the world that includes all other worlds. Of course, imagine these songs in some, I would say, transcendent and then inclusion, like each song being more and more comprehensive and more inclusive and more beautiful in that way. And there's a hierarchy for him, a sacred order of those songs: the song of the self, the song of the nation, or the ethnic body, then the song of humanity as a whole, the song of the cosmos, and then the song of all song. And I began, and I framed that also in a slightly different way from Hillel in the first sword that you see in front of you. The song, the simpler phrasing in some way is from Hillel in the Pirkei Avot. So Hillel said, Vaya Omer, Inena Nili Mili. If I am not for myself, who is for me? Ochshani Latzmi Ma'ani. And when I am for myself, or only for myself, what am I? V'im lo achshav ematai. And if not now, when? It's an amazing and powerful teaching, and it's kind of very Taoistic in some ways. In some profound way, you kind of feel the language here is aiding in memory, but it's also brilliant, and its capacity, its laconic capacity to be both economic and also profound all at once, and also it's just so remarkable. And I think one of the more enigmatic elements of this piece is the third piece, in the triptych. Right? It seems as though we're working with multiple axes here that we shifted from the locus of the self or the relational axis to a temporal axis. It seems kind of an interesting moment, right? If I'm not for myself, then who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, then what am I? That seems to be one axis, right? And all of a sudden, we're now invited into a meditation on time. Like, what's the connection between the first two pieces and the third piece? It's kind of interesting, right? If I'm only for myself, then what am I? Great. But now, right, if there's no time but now, if not now, when? And also, I guess I'll add a second question here, which is the phrasing of the third piece, if not now, when, open-ended? In the sense of, if not now, then when should we? Is it like, oh, that's a question one should ask. If not now, then when should we do it? Or is it a statement, a declarative statement that says if not now, then there will never be a moment but now, right? Is he chiding anyone that kind of waits? Or is it a more epistemological, philosophical inquiry into the nature of time itself, that there is nothing but now? If one, all projections in the past and future happen from a point in nowness. Is he Sam Harris writ large, or some kind of great Buddhist, or Hindu philosopher focusing on the nature? Is it Heidegger? Like, what is happening here? And so I think I want to suggest that in Avram's life, as I kind of alluded to this, last night, that I think that we have in the narrative of Abraham from chapter 12 through the end of chapter 17, a narrative that itself is underscoring this teaching from Hillel and from Rav Kook, that is essentially that we begin with the self and move from the self towards the nation and from the nation towards the universal in that direction. And that Abraham, I would like to argue this morning that Abraham actually in chapter 12, which is where we meet Abraham really for the first time, is not the same Abraham that we will meet in chapter 17. And that the events that happen in this week's third portion are themselves playing out Hillel's maxim, moving from the self towards the beyond the self. And that the third piece of Hillel's statement here is actually very much what is happening in this morning's Parsha. So I'd like to look at that with all of you. Okay? Verse number 2. Vayomer Adonai el Avram, Lech lecha me'artzecha mimoladtecha mibeit avicha, ela aretz asher ar'eka. And God said to Avram, go forth from your native land, leave your native land, your father's house, and go to the land that I will show you. Ve'escha legoy gadol, I will make for you a great nation, va'avarechecha, and will bless you. Ve'agadla shemecha ve'yeh bracha, I will make your name great, which we'll come back to in chapter 17. But I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. You'll be a blessing. Those who bless you will bless. Those who curse you, and through you or in you, all of the families of the earth will be blessed, which is significant. Verse 3 is incredibly significant in its universal capacity. So we have here kind of what's called in the Christian tradition the election of Abraham. The specifics of Abraham's election are not, or the reasons for it are not given, right? We don't know why, right? Guys, we don't know why Abraham was chosen. It's not clear at all from the text why he was chosen. Yeah? Right? Yeah, you guys with me? Yeah. So very dramatic. The whole open book business is very dramatic. It's very dramatic class. It's very coming together to learn Torah. It's very dramatic. Okay. So I think what's noticeable for me and what I'd like to highlight is that there is no definitional reason for Avram's being chosen, right? We're not given, at this point in the text, a rationale for Avram's being chosen, right? We're not, yeah.
Any folklore about Avram's childhood or boyhood?
Absolutely.
Right.
In fact, that is one of the richest parts of the Midrashic tradition is actually trying to underscore and fill in Avram's merit. In other words, like Avram wasn't just chosen. I mean, everything in the rabbis is it can't just be that Avram was chosen because God loves him, which is usually the Christian answer was, Avram is beloved. God will choose whom God chooses, and it's grace. But in the rabbinic tradition, beginning in early Midrashic literature, Avram is depicted as a seeker, somebody who figures out, the way of the world. Avram, in the famous parable of the Midrash, Rabbi Yitzchak says that to what can this be compared to someone who's walking by the way and sees a burning castle. I'm sure people have heard of this Midrash. There's a burning castle, and what's called a Birad Doleket. And Avram, stops and says, "Is it possible that a castle, lit up, or whatever the word doleket means? Is it lit up, or is it on fire? Something's happening with it, but there's no bala birah, there's no master of the house." And so Avram, right, miyad, hitzitza bala birah. And so God then says, "Vayomer Avram, Vayom Adon Avram, lech lecha." So God's actually forced out of God's obvious, hiddenness by virtue of Avram's kind of unrelenting search for God, right? Or unrelenting questioning. Avram is the original seeker. In Maimonides' formulation in the 12th century, he's the original philosopher, always, and the parable of the Birado, like it becomes a cosmological proof for God's existence. Like he's saying, how can the sphere move without a mover, the prime mover, right? And then in later iterations, in Abraham Joshua Heschel, he becomes the great social justice advocate. He sees the world not just lit up, but also on fire. And Heschel, God search, man in search of God, or God in search of man, and says that Avram's the original social justice advocate. I'd like to argue that Avram's not yet a social justice advocate, and Avram's own maturation will not move in quite the Heschelian way. It will work towards Heschel, but not begin with Heschel. So I think Avram is explicitly in this moment, and you can hear it in the blessings. Avram is being now wooed by God by the promise of personal glorification, right? Lech lecha in this reading, and the way the Chazal, the rabbis read this, is laha'anatcha, it'll be good for you, right? Go to Israel because it's going to be good for you. You're going to be wealthy, you're going to be famous, you'll have a ton of Twitter followers. It's going to be awesome, right? Like you're on the road, man. Like it's good. Like how can we motivate you? Lech lecha. You're gonna leave your house. Don't worry, I'm giving you another house. Like you're going to the land, but like you don't have any kids. I'll give you kids. I'm like the genie. I got it all for you. But immediately when Avram comes into land, it doesn't go that well, right? Right. From the moment that Avram enters the land, right, everything about Avram, in a sense, runs against his own personal gain, right? He is decidedly disappointed, and should be when he gets into the land. Let's look at these promises that were given to him. Right, as soon as he gets into the land, chapter 13. What happens as soon as Abram gets into the land? Everybody know? There's a famine, which means what? He has to leave the land. It's like, hey, I'm giving you this thing that you want, which is land, but guess what? Right? You don't have it. Not going to be good, right? So much for that. I must be thinking, what happened to your promise of land, right? How did that work out? And then the very next moment, even in that story, Avram has to go down to Egypt, and his wife is in danger, right? In the story of going down to Egypt, Pharaoh or the king of Egypt is interested in Sarai, and Avram is terrified, and Avram acts like for his own best interests. Right, he's not altogether that worried about Sarai. Make sure that Sarai takes care of Avram. Like they're going to kill me. Do you mind? I mean, honestly, I'm not sure that Avram at this moment is the person that Kierkegaard later called the knight of faith. Right? I mean, honestly, in chapter 13 of the book of Genesis, Avram meets his first test, which the Ramban and others say is maybe one of the biggest tests. And according to the Ramban, he fails this test on some level, partially. He's told to go to the land, and immediately there's a famine. And the Ramban says he should have stayed. He should have stayed. Why did he go? Why did he leave? It doesn't even say here that he asked God what to do. Here's God telling him to go to the land and listen for my deployment instructions. And all of a sudden he comes to the land, there's a famine, and he should call up God and say, okay, you didn't tell me about the famine thing. And instead he just says, oh, I'll go down to Egypt. And going down to Egypt in the Bible is a bad thing, right? It's not like that's not the place to go. Yeah, it doesn't work out. And in fact, according to Nachmanides, this going down to Egypt becomes Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim. That everything that happens to Avram in the land of Egypt will become a precursor or kind of a foreshadow of what happens later on to his children, right? Or his descendants. And so Avram here is like he's acting, wildly.
Yeah, like a moral descent.
It's a moral in biblical term, in biblical index, that would be a moral descent, right? Often geography here has a moral valence, right? So going back to where Kasdim, going back to where Avram comes from, don't go into Egypt, stay in the land, right? And unless I tell you to go somewhere. That's why when Jacob was about to leave the land, God comes and says, it's okay. Go down, don't be afraid, I'll bring you back up. Right. But with Avram, no such communication happens, and it's not a good thing. So chapter 13 The end of chapter 12 has Avram, I keep saying 13. In chapter 12, Avram leaves the land that was promised to him and goes down to Egypt and then saves his own butt, right? And he's consistently thinking about himself. That's the next moment, though. Here things begin to change for Avram. Avram in chapter 13, sorry, I confused all, but in chapter 13, we're now the very next story in Lech Lecha. So Avram, first story is Avram hears the call, goes down, leaves his land, picks everything up and goes to Canaan. Second scene, Avram comes to Canaan and there's a famine, and then what happens? He leaves the land, right? Third scene, what's the third scene? In the third scene, we're introduced to a war that is called the War of the Four Kings against the Five Kings. Anybody know this story? It's like, read the story when you get a chance, chapter 13 of the book of Genesis, if you have a Bible or Tanakh handy at some point, right? These four kings start to go to war against these five kings. We're not told exactly what it's all about, but it has all the markings of like the movie rendition of Noah and the Ark, right? With like all of this mythic stuff. There's a lot of bitumen pits and all kinds of things. It has like all the images of the games, like Game of Thrones / Lord of the Rings. It has this quality to it. These guys with really weird names, Kedala Omer and so on. And amidst all of this, the kings come and they sack Sodom, right? And in the Sodom, who lives in Sodom? Lot.
This is still in the land.
This is in the land. This is after Avram's already come back. I'm sorry, let me fill in some piece here. Avram comes back from Egypt. They survive. A little piece I forgot to mention is that the Torah then tells us about that Avram and his nephew Lot and their shepherds have a quarrel about about land, right? Each one of them wants the land, and they're fighting over land where they can pasture their sheep and their flocks. And when it's told to Avram this is happening, he says, it's not a problem. Like, why should there be a fight between us? You take whatever you want, and I'll take, you Lot, go do what you want, take whatever you want, and we'll separate and we'll divide. And then the Torah then tells us that Lot made a choice to live next to Sodom, right? Next to the city Sodom. And here's the story. I'm sorry, this story, chapter 13. We're not up to the war yet. I'm like getting myself all finished. Let's just look at scene 3. Avram Yashav Eretz Canaan, V'lo Yashav Be'arei HaKikar V'yahal ad Sodom. In chapter 13, verse 12, Avram remained in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the plain, pitching his tents near Sodom. Now, we know from this extra little piece of Torah in verse 12, that Lot choosing the cities of the plain and pitching his tent towards Sodom is, Nikki, this is not just geography, right? Sodom is already, we know already that the people of Sodom we're told are evil, right?
Yeah.
And for him to pitch his tent near Sodom, it says something about him, right? The very next verse, I'm sorry, it says, Anshe Sodom ra'im v'chata'im la'Adonai ma'od, right? Verse 13 already tells us all we need to know about Lot's choice, right? Lot is Avram's family, but he's pitching his tent in the direction of Sodom. Whatever you know about Sodom, forget it. It doesn't matter. Whatever history did to Sodom, but the Torah wants us to know that this is a moral failure on Lot's part, and he's Avram's nephew.
Why does he do that?
Goodness sakes, I don't know. All right, V'Adonai Amar el Avram. And now God says to him, now this is a moment. Listen to this moment. God says to Avram, Acharei hipared Lot me'imo. And this is interesting information. After Lot had separated from him. That's an important piece of information. God speaks to Avram after Lot is separated from him. In other words, it was important for Avram to separate from Lot. Right? That's not just a temporal, piece of information. Oh, when did he speak to him? After that moment. No, because he separated from him, the text seems to be indicating that he says to him something important. Look, he says, we're in verse 14 here. Right? Lift up your eyes and look to the north, to the south, to the east, and the west. All of the land that you see, I will give to you. In other words, I'm re-promising you the land. I'm recapitulating, I'm re-establishing, I'm re-articulating the original promise from chapter 12. Right? This is a classic covenantal promise from God to Abraham, Avram as he's known. I will make your seed many, like the land and so on. You'll be fruitful. Now walk, throughout the land, through its length and its breadth, I will give it to you. Avram. Right, this is the vital moment. Like Avram establishes his own tent in this moment, right? And establishes that he is separated from Lot. Now, in the next scene, now we're up to everything that I said to you. Chapter 14, we have the war that begins for the 4 kings against the 5 kings. With all of that we've just been told, Avram has been promised the land, he has to leave the land. He goes to Egypt. He's very focused on himself, he comes back up. He says he separates from his nephew Lot, who's clearly making a different choice in his life. And Avram, right, we're told very clearly that God reestablishes the covenant of the land with Avram at this moment after having separated from his nephew Lot. And then the next scene unfolds. All of a sudden now there's a war going on, right? We're shifting gears. The next scene, scene 4, there's a war. And these 4 kings are going against the 5 kings. And one of the places that is included in the war, one of the kings is Melech Sodom and Amorah. Sodom and Amorah are involved in the war, we know. Right? And the Torah goes out of its way to tell us about the beginnings of the war, and then pointedly to tell us that they raided the city of Sodom and they took everything with them. And in verse 12, now verse 12 goes out of its way to tell us who was in Sodom. We already knew, right, who had pitched his tent in Sodom, but now Avram's mishpucha. Now the family of Abraham is involved in this war, in this conflict. All of a sudden, a war that seemed to be like, okay, what does this have to do with our story? There are 4 kings and 5 kings, but Lot gets involved. Now we already know, what do we know about Lot from the text already? He's not a guy that Adam should be associating with. God speaks to him after they separate, and clearly Lot is making the wrong decision. But now he's involved, whether we like it or not, he's involved. And verse 12, by the way, makes it really clear that he had been living in Sodom. For the second time, we know that he's in Sodom. And some refugee, the first use of the term refugee in the Torah, this was on a weekend when somebody sent me a beautiful Yiddish story called The Refugee, that was written by a Yiddish writer in the 1920s about a Jew who wanted to take revenge against the pogromist who was living peacefully in Berlin across the way from him. But he had known that he was he knew who he was, even though he shaved his beard and was sauntering around Berlin like he was, having the time of his life. But he had been a witness. This refugee had been a witness to the atrocities of this Ukrainian anti-Semite, and how he wanted to plot to kill him. It's called The Refugee. It's a very powerful story I read this morning. And how he came to the establishment of Jews in Berlin, and he just wanted to find a way to get a gun. And they wouldn't give one to him. They were going to put him into a sanitarium. And the end of the story is that he killed himself. That's in the proof. Tony. And the refugee came. And he said to the Avram, he said to Avram, who's now called the Ivri, the first time Avram is called the Ivri, really the only time it's called Ivri. the Jews are called Ivrim in Exodus, but this is the first time Avram is called the Hebrew, whatever this word Ivri means, but we'll call him the Hebrew. He's now, I'm in verse 13, people can follow me here. He's now in the terebinths of Mamre, and he's with his allies. We're told that he's with Emor and I'm sorry, the Mamre Emori. Mamre is an Emorite who is the brother of Eshkol, the brother of Aner, and all three of them are all Baalei Brit Abraham. They're all Avram's allies. So Avram is with his allies. Vayishma Avram ki nishba achiv. This is amazing. Avram heard from the refugee that his brother, it's not his brother, right? I mean, this is where the Torah uses language this way. He's his nephew, but he's called his brother. But the familial bond is here underscored, right? His brother has been taken captive. And Avram doesn't waste a moment, even though Lot was the person that was, right? It's his fault for being in Sodom, right? What was he doing there? Didn't he know? Wasn't he raised differently by my brother Haran? Right? He's been in my house for so long. He's my nephew. What's he doing there?
Doing business.
He's doing business. He's selling arms. Who knows what he's doing? Vayarek et chanichav, and Avram, right? Avram, he girds, right? He gets his sword ready. It's he scabbards. What's the English here? He puts his
He girded himself.
right. So he put his sword together. He mustered his retainers. It's really funny. Okay. So he got all of his, he gathered his people, Shmona Asar, Ushlosh Me'od Vayudov Adan, 318, right? Armed forces, and they went in pursuit. Vayachalek Aleim Lailahu Bavada Vayakin, and they split up, and they and they struck, right? And they struck, and they continued to pursue them, right, all the way. Ad Chova, Asher Mitzmola Damascus. They went all the way north of Damascus. And Vayasher Eskol Rakush, and he brought back all of the possessions. V'gamis Lod Achiv Rakusho Ishi, V'gamis Anashim Yesa'am. He brought back his Lot and his brother, his family, his mishpocha, and all of their possessions, and the women and the rest of the captives were brought back. And now verse 17, and the king of Sodom, right? The king of Sodom comes out after they had returned from Hakot at Kedar Omer, after defeating and striking Kedar Omer, the Makmeh Sharito, El Emek Shavet, to the valley of equality. Emek Shavet. Emek HaMelech, which is called the Emek, the valley of the king. Umalki Tzedek Melech Shalem. And now the king, called the king of justice, who is the king of a place called Shalem, or Shlemut, wholeness, later known as Jerusalem, brings out food and wine, and he is a priest of the Most High. And he blesses him and says, blessed is Abram to the Most High. We still use these words in our liturgy 3 times a day. In verse 20, and blessed is the Most High, right? Who has delivered your foes into your hands, right? And then Melech Sodom says, I'm sorry, he says to, I'm sorry, he says, give me back my people, and you can have all the possessions. And then Avram says, no, in verse 22, I lift up my hand to God Most High. I have not taken, right, even, I didn't take even, right, I won't take even a shoelace from what belongs to you, right? I'm not interested in your possessions, right? I will only give back what my people have eaten, right? Everybody who's with me can take there, but I don't want that. I only want to bring back looks. I'm not interested in being connected to you, right? I did what I had to do because it was mishpacha. I would argue that this chapter 14 now, which will then lead into chapter 15 with the Big Ben Abtarim and other things, but this moment for Avram at this moment is saying, in my opinion, Im Ena Nili Mili. Avram is now hearkening back to Rav Kook's song, saying that my familial responsibility. We might have difference of opinion. I don't like that you're going to be the way you are, Lot. I don't think that you're always living according to my values. We don't agree. You're BB, you're a settler, all such frames. We should start using those words about people. They dehumanize. You live in the wrong part of Israel. You live in the wrong part of this place, whatever it is. But like, no, you're mishpacha. Like on some profound level, like the sense that we are family, that we are embodied first and foremost as Jews, is vital to this narrative, and that it extends beyond Avram. Right, you'll see in a moment, Avram is ready at this moment. Right, this is just his extended family, right? Not just Avram, but his family. Right? But Avram has also become someone who can sing the song beyond his own family too. But he has to be able to see like bigger than just Avram's mishpacha, and that actually I think is the reason for the renewed covenant that happens in chapter 17, where Avram is about to receive a completely new moment, a new and a different covenant with God in chapter 15, in chapter 17 rather. So let's go there, and then I'll leave about 10 to 15 minutes for conversation. In chapter 17, in source number 5, I just want to prepare us for this. In chapter 17, basically Avram will be given the covenantal covenant of Brit Milah of circumcision, and will be given a new name, which will signal a new covenant. And if you look at source 5 here in Everett Fox, he writes that as Cloud notes, up to this point, the covenant between God and Avram has been rather one-sided. But in this chapter, Avram is given a command to perform not only of circumcision, but to be moral and upright. Circumcision is but the symbol of the ongoing imperative to do what is just. In many societies, circumcision has been connected directly to puberty and marriage, usually taking place, as it does here with Ishmael, at around the age of 13. Our passage is moving back of the right essentially to birth is a daring reinterpretation, at once diffusing the act of exclusively sexual content, while at the same time suggesting that the covenant, a lifelong commitment, is nevertheless passed down biologically through the generations. The males of the tribe are not simply made holy for marriage, they bear the mark upon their bodies as a sacred reminder of their mission. The chapter echoes with repetition, exceedingly, you and your seed after you, for the ages, into your generations, preparatory to Avram's assumption of fatherhood of an individual and of a people. His name is changed, as is that of Sarai. This act is of the utmost significance in the biblical world, since the person's name was indicative of personality and fate. The receiving of a new one signified a new life or a new stage in life. Similarly with Yaakov and with in a sort of coronation of Yosef, will undergo a change of name. Such a practice will still survives among kings and popes. Let's look at this chapter and then open it up. Vayi Avram ben 90 shana v'teisha shanim. Vayera Adonai Avram v'yomer elav ani El Shaddai hitalech l'fanav v'yed tamim. Avram was 99 years old, and God appeared to Avram and said to him, I am El Shaddai, walk in my ways and be tamim, be blameless. I will give you now my covenant between you and your children, and you will be exceedingly numerous. And Avram fell on his face, saying, right, and God spoke to him. Behold, my covenant will be with you, and you will be the father of many nations. You will not be called Avram any longer, but Avraham. Av Amon Goyim Nitatika. V'hifreti otcha b'ma'od ol u'nitaticha legoyim u'malachim mime'echa yetzeu. says to him, your name will no longer be Avram, but rather Avraham, because you will be the father of many nations. A play on the word, the hay in there is for Hamon. Right? Avram will be elevated father, but Avraham will be a father to many nations. In verse 7, I will lift up, my covenant will be established between you and your children for many generations. For you and for your seed. I will give to you and your children all of this land as an inheritance forever. And then with Sarah in source number 7, Vayomer Elohim el Avraham, Sarai ishtakalo tikaresh et shma Sarai ki Sarashma. I will also change her name from Sarai to Sarah. Uberachti ota v'gam natati mimena lecha ben. Uberachtia v'aita legoyim malchei amim mimena yiyu. Like she will once again, now the blessing is through her, and the inclusion of Sarah here is also remarkable. And in other words, it's not just what happened in chapter 12, something in chapter 17 has shifted. The language is different. The ones who are being named here are different. Their name change is different. And the specificity and the expansiveness of this is remarkable, right? It's a much wider blessing. And so and I had two other sources from the rabbis to underscore this moment as a moment of universalism as opposed to the particularity of chapter 12. I'm gonna stop here and open it up, but just say this last thing about this movement. I think that when Avram is given the blessing in chapter 12 and told to leave his land, it's lech lecha, it's for you. And through the trials and tribulations of Avram, both in his experience of being in Egypt and what it meant to be endangered there, but also the locus of his own care and concern was for himself. He then broadens slightly, like Rav Kook's song, he broadens, right? When he realizes that even though Lot, right, and he don't agree and that have very different neighborhoods, they're still part of one family, and that seeing his brother, quote unquote, his nephew, his family taken captive, leads Avram to take up arms and to get involved in a way that he might not have earlier. And then even further, I think that Avram, by the time we arrive at chapter 17, Avram is now prepared to be an Av Hamon Goyim. Avram is prepared to be a father of many nations, not just his own. It's something that Avram, in realizing both his connection, I would say, argue probably with Hagar, which we alighted over, the fact that Hagar became a part of his family, right? The Egyptian, right? The place where he had been in chapter 12 now becomes a part of his bishpacha, and he falls in love with Hagar, maybe, and Yishmael. And at one point, which we alighted over, I should not have, Avram learns to love Yishmael and realizes that Yishmael could also be his son, right? In that sense of a covenantal son. And that even though God in chapter 17 will bring Avram back to Sarah as the source of his future family, Avram has been exposed now to a universalism that demands of him to later on fight for Sodom and Amorah in chapter 18 and chapter 19. And the movement, though, is clear. Avram has to move from a place of ethnocentric song singing to a place of kind of more humanitarian song singing. But he has to be able to hold on to both of those songs. And so that when Hillel finally says, right, if not now, when, what I said last night, I still hold this morning, which is, if not now, when doesn't mean if not now. Now is the only moment in which to act. But in any given moment, one must know which of those two songs is the song to sing. Right? There are moments where no one is singing the song. Right? No one is coming to fight for Lot, and he's all alone and isolated. And Avram must, right at that moment, fight for Lot. And there are moments, of course, where we encounter people who only know how to sing the song of the nation. They don't know Yishmael. They don't know Hagar. They don't know, right, the beauty that's beyond their own family. They think, right, that they're all alone, and they don't realize that they do have allies indeed and responsibility. And that, my friend, is a koan, to use the Zen riddle. That is a koan that is almost impossible, right, to know how to answer in any given moment, right? But it is imperative, though, that we try. I'm going to stop there. That's my kind of overview. That's kind of what I wanted to share. the floor is open. I want to invite us to remain connected to our I statements, to say things from the heart. I know that at this point, in the chat area, there is a Gansa other class going on, which is shocking to me also, given like that nobody here in the room was allowed to speak, during this, or didn't want to speak, but like there's a Gansa shiur going on in the chat. I'll open it up here in the room, and then we'll move. Okay, so. Okay,
I was just thinking about the,
Thomas, and then, okay, we'll move. Thomas, can you hear this online? Can you guys hear?
I'll speak towards the owl, which I hope is still with us.
We can hear.
Thinking about that original poem that you started us with, the Hillel, it's such a riddle because it's not if then, it's if when then.
Yes.
It's these three, and when and if, at least in the English, can be used interchangeably in syntax, even though if is a conditional conjunctive and when is an adverb. You can say if this happens, we'll do that. When that happens, we'll do that.
Right.
And so they slide into each other, but they are distinct.
Okay.
And then the koan ends, if I'm not for me, who will be for me? And when I am for myself alone, what am I? And if not now, then when? So it takes us from if, when, then. And if and then are not interchangeable. They're in fact opposites. So that's already interesting. And if you think of the progression of that syntax and in the journey of Abraham to Abraham, from the first covenant, as you called it, where my head went, as it always does, is back to the cathedral, back to architecture, back to Heschel. And you could argue that in the first adventure, Abraham was located in space. Okay, this is your land, this is your cathedral, there it is. But still dislocated in time because of famine. And the agricultural cycle is the most profound temporal cycle of that culture that we can imagine. So like right place, wrong time. And then he kind of stumbles out of time and recovers, and then returns, but then is time, not just place, but place and time, situated in time. And I would argue the cathedral in space is much easier to build. You just need stone and labor, which of course we return to, but then the cathedral in time is the harder gig. Anyway, I think the progression maps onto the cone.
And it also maps onto the covenantal context in chapter 17, actually, the act that is given, the performative act that is given now as a new element of this. It happens on the body, but it also happens at a particular point in time. Like the context of circumcision is not just on the who, but on when it's being done. Right. So it has to be done on the right day. It can't be done on the wrong day. It has to be on the 8th day. There's a very specific time that is designated. Right. And so Avram is located now in again, relocated, but now given a very specific, there's a right time and a wrong time.
What do the rabbis say is the status of the Sabbath at this time in the mind?
It's a good question. I think the rabbis like to imagine everybody who lived before the Sabbath was actually commanded observing the Sabbath, but we don't really have any mention. There are a number of allusions to time, like more later Judaic time in let's say pre-Sinai stories. Like, at the moment when the angels come, it'll be quote unquote Passover because Avram will make matzah, things like that. But it's not altogether plausible. But certainly the tradition has it that that Shabbat of Breshit, right? That Shabbat of Breshit in chapter 1, the Shabbat of creation, is predates Sinai. So I don't really.
There's something about getting from if then to if when.
If then to if when. Okay, beautiful. Who's Tony? Yeah.
So I think this is to answer any then coma, I think requires to go to the land of non-duality. As in, what's the sound of one hand clapping? We know the sound of two hand clapping. Well, what's the sound of one hand? So in quantum physics, time and space are actually dimensions of each other in some sense. To start with, it's not two separate realms. One of the mind-boggling things about quantum physics view of quantum space is they're connected in profound ways. So which song? Buber, in his own small way or big way, little big man way, says, we need to fight, but we need to fight lovingly. That is his take-home message, among others, to us as Jews and to the world. We need to fight, but we need to fight lovingly, with great respect and great love for the other.
Amen. Okay, thank you, Tony. Go on. I think, no, we first had Asher Chaim and then Jay.
Vod Harav, our impossible situation pales in comparison to what's going on in the world. Please understand, and this is with great respect, we try to appreciate and have empathy for your need to have us without faces today. But without faces and without voices, we become like passive viewers of a study session. And that is why we felt the need to text one another in the chat so that at least we could have some sense, without seeing each other's reactions, how the text was landing with us and how your teaching is landing with us. Dibarti.
Timothy. Okay, so there are Asher Chaim. Jay.
Riffing off our resident brilliant architect, it seems to me that building in time is inherently transitory or portable, like the Sukkah or the Mishkan. And that maybe is our relationship to Ivri, something that passes. And so the significance of time is that whatever we build, we have to understand is inherently transitory and ephemeral.
So down. Okay. Yes.
Okay, getting back to Abraham. Abraham was given a blessing,
Yeah.
and his blessing was that he would be the father of many nations, and they would be as numerous as the stars in heaven and the sands at the seashores.
Mhm.
Now we come back to our time, there are billions of people on the planet.
Mhm.
Which billions of people are part of Abraham's descendants? The most important thing I believe about the state of Israel, founding the state of Israel, is that the state of Israel was founded so that the tribe of the Jews, the Jewish tribe, because it is a tribe, was established so that God can bring all the tribes of Israel together, as it is in Ezekiel, Yechezkel 37, chapter 37 says, make two sticks. Take one stick for the tribe of Judah and one stick for the tribes of Israel. But it's really not sticks. These are trees, because it says eights. Eights is a tree, but there's a mistranslation into the English, and they say sticks. The way I see it is Judah has many branches in many countries, many nations, for many years. Now we're brought together, and the rest of Israel, which are billions of people on the planet, also are many branches. And in our time, I believe we're going to be brought together under God.
Amen.
What do you think?
Yeah, I'm not a biblical literist. I don't have a literal understanding of the Torah on any level. And even those
You gotta be
prophecies-
kidding me.
Yeah, and so those prophecies to me are, what's significant is that for me, the state of Israel beyond religious language was essentially a refuge for like we spoke about the refugee here, the Palit, right? The Jews who made their way to Israel, certainly after the Shoah, but obviously many that came before were refugees in the profound sense of the word. And most of the Jews that are living there now are Jews who were refugees from Muslim and other Arab nations around Israel. It's basically a nation of refugees themselves. And I don't want to have a conversation about the purpose of the state of Israel or its context or whether or not it was built upon the suffering of another people at this moment, which of course is a legitimate conversation to happen at any moment, but not during this particular moment of war, in my opinion. think that this moment is for us as Jews here, as Avram heard the call that his brother was held captive, for us to hold the universal heart that is broken with what's taking place, and also deeply sing the song of Jews who are now burying their loved ones, and parents who are burying their children. And I don't think that those songs are in conflict, except when they are. Right, when we sing the song that is a song of love, like I said last night, the song of heartbreak, the song of that calls now for humanitarian. I think the right call should be for corridors. Humanitarian aid should come in, and I think that there should be a way for there to be a ceasefire for humanitarian purposes for the moment. But I would ask people who call on Israel at this moment. People have been texting me and writing me. Again, I've gotten literally dozens and dozens of emails from people who say, "Is Jewish life more valuable to you than Palestinian life?" and I say to them, "That's what a koan that is." Because of course, to me, every life is infinitely worthy. And at this moment, I'm together with my brothers and sisters asking, what would you have us do right now that would make sure that in some future moment in a year or two or three, that more of our Jewish children are not slaughtered? Right? That is what is facing Israel at this moment. What are we to do in the face of the inevitability of 40,000 Hamas soldiers who have tunnels reaching from north to south, filled with missiles, filled with guns, filled with ammunition? We left Gaza. Hamas came into a coup. We can go through the context of this and the barricades and the open air prison, all of this. But in the end of the day, what's facing Jews right now, who are lovers of humanity, is that we already know what took place when we left Hamas alone. We saw what took place, right? We saw what took place on October 7th when we left Hamas alone. We saw them come in with cameras and Facebook and slaughter and publicly declare who they were. What nation in the world would allow that kind of regime to live on it next door to it, right? And so I think that is we should turn the question around to people and say, what would you have Israel do? And anybody who comes up with some facile answer, well, just stop it, or stop bombing, just send in troops, right? Do a ground invasion. I mean, what are people talking about now? Like, what are they saying? And more so, how is it conscionable for Jews, right, like who say, if not now, right, if not now, who took over Grand Central yesterday and other Jews? Trust me, I believe each and every one of them has a huge heart, and God forbid I would never say anything, God forbid, about anybody, but they are so deluded in their naivete, dangerously so. And our tradition has words for people like that, right? Have words for someone. Like there's a story about King Shaul in the Torah, speaking of the Torah, where King Shaul was given a command to destroy Amalek. And I'm not saying that Palestinian people, God forbid, Palestinian in its sense are not Amalek, God forbid. But where is the outcry? Shaul was punished because he had compassion on someone who later was Achzari, would later turned out to be a butcher. And so again, I think that there's not one person in Israel that is wanting to have thousands of Israeli soldiers from a purely selfish perspective. That one person I speak to wants there to be 1,000 to 10,000 Israeli soldiers killed in an incursion into Gaza. But at this moment, Israelis are asking themselves, and I think Jews should also be asking themselves, right? How do we know that whatever we do next will not be the stepping stones towards 2,000 more Jewish children being slaughtered on Facebook? And that is what's facing the leadership of Israel right now, not a desire for blood and vengeance. I'm sorry, just because the media here cherry picks statements by people who make crazy genocidal remarks about the entirety of the Palestinian people, it's not true on any level of the majority of Jews. And I'm speaking for the majority of Jews in Israel. They're not saying, let's go drop a bomb on Gaza. And so I think it's like there is now a war on every front now. There's a war happening on the ground, and there's a war happening in hearts, and especially for people like I think all of us, like I said last night, whose hearts are literally in pieces. We can't get through our day every day thinking about the images, not just of Jews, but of Palestinians, and we're tearing our hair out going, what, this has to stop, this has to stop. And I say to myself, I hear myself saying that too, this has to stop, this has to stop. I don't want to see another little boy, another little girl, I don't want to. And then I ask myself, so what would you do? I said, well, what am I supposed to do? What are we gonna do? And then I said to myself, I don't know. And so I would invite us to not know. And I would also invite us to say this moment as Jews, like there is a song of the nation now that is coming at a cost when we sing the song of the universal. Isn't it remarkable that not one of those governments that are calling on Israel to ceasefire is willing to open up its borders to take in Palestinian refugees? Isn't it remarkable, right? Isn't it remarkable that in our community, people called and said, can we give money towards Palestinian? I said, of course you can, but like Qatar is giving, like isn't it a choice here? Do you have enough money to give to both of these causes? Right, the money, should we go to mosques right now around New York and churches and see if they're raising money for Jewish hostages? Can we do that? And by the way, there's a part of me that hates that. I used to sit and talk with Jews like that and be like, give me a break. But I'm saying to myself now, and I'm in ways that I've said before, but now I'm saying it publicly. Why aren't there Abraham Joshua Heschel weekends in churches around the country instead of only being MLK weekends in synagogues? Why not have anti-Semitism Sunday, where churches around the country talk about how Christianity is itself the source of so much Jew hatred in the world? Why don't we demand that? Why don't we demand these things in the way that they've been demanded of us so that we can live in a world where we're not just the ones who are fighting to sing the song of a universal, but also having others sing the songs of our particular? So I'm just at this moment, I feel broken. And I know that there are people for whom this is not, right, it's not satisfactory. They want me and other leaders to stand up and say, ceasefire, call for peace and so on. But I would just put the onus on people to say, how do we as Jews make sure, right, going forward that no more Jewish children are slaughtered? It's like a basic fundamental responsibility that we have as Jews.
I think we have to raise it.
I'm sorry, but yeah, so Nikki had her hand up. And then
From a 12-step program perspective, I want to go back to that when, if not now, when, because in the programs we're taught that we have no future, and we have no past and no future in a way, but we just have this moment to act. And that there is an imperative to act at this very moment.
I just feel as though, I want to close by saying this, and then we have to, I think I said this 2 weeks ago, and I still say it. I wish that at this moment I wasn't in a position of leadership, because there are people that are infinitely, like, incredibly smarter than me that would say things. But I just say that I no, but I'm serious. I'm serious. I just feel as though in this moment, I live a split screen life. I grew up in a deeply ethnocentric family that also was humanistic in many ways, but the song of the nation was our main song. And I spent so many of my years living in the song of humanity and in walking in circles hand in hand with so many people. And brothers and sisters, Jew, non-Jew, Muslim, Christian, atheist, agnostic, I find myself wanting to be a citizen of the world in every imaginable way. And I think that I'm reeling, I'm reeling by the last 3 weeks, by the reeling from, like all of you, from what's happening. And I'm reeling not only because of the carnage. It would be enough, like, just to imagine, that much carnage. But I'm also reeling from in shock around what's being said and what's being sought and sold and bought around what's happening here. I'm just completely, to hear people saying intifada, global intifada, on the streets of New York, to know that I don't personally, again, I don't, and this is another moment. Like, I want to be able to say right now that for a Jew to walk around the Upper West Side with his yarmulke or her my star and say that that is dangerous for us, without immediately having to also say, but what about rising Islamophobia? Like, even that gesture is also problematic to me. Like, I used to think that that was the only way to be even level. The answer, like, every time I said Jews are afraid, I had to say, but also I have to also mention that, like, it's scary for Muslims in the world. Okay, but we're Jewish. And I just want to just say that it's okay for us to be able to sit in that particularity and in that song and say, like, as a Jew, like, to walk around and be afraid that they're like my niece who's at NYU or my niece who's up at Columbia University is terrified. Terrified. And by the way, like, I'm sorry, it is happening right now in to some degree here, at least in one direction via the Jews. And I know that everybody's going to say, but what about what's going on in the West Bank and the settlers? Yeah, there are small pockets of radicals who are doing crazy things. It's true. Out of 8 million Jews, there are like 200 that are acting like a bunch of Meshuggahs. And trust me, every single person in Israel who hears about that wants to lynch them. When Baruch Goldstein, of cursed memory, went into a mosque on Purim and slaughtered 29 Muslims, nobody handed out candy in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv. Maybe one person who's now in the government, and every other Jew in the world is now screaming, how could this person be in the government with Baruch Goldstein? It's so anomalous. But in the world that we're fighting, that's not anomalous, it's de rigueur. It's de rigueur. People, even Mahmoud Abbas, who is a quote unquote, right, moderate. And by the way, I believe that we do have to have a two-state solution. I do believe in that. And I do believe that we have to make peace ultimately with a moderate faction. I do believe that Israel does things and has done things in the past that alienates the moderates and actually increases. I believe all of that is true. But let's be honest about who Mahmoud Abbas is. They still give money to terrorists who blow up Jewish children. They're still on the dole. They still get paid. And if you ask Palestinians, and I ask them directly, my friends, how can you allow someone like Mahmoud Abbas to give money to somebody who who's a terrorist? They have no answer. They have no answer.
They're playing murderers. They're paying murderers.
So I'm just saying, and by the way, AOC, outspoken, criticizing anti-Jewish. So let me just say the final thing, and I know that we as a community, we're avoiding this conversation. We can avoid it only for so long, and maybe we'll have another forum to be able to make space for multiple opinions and multiple experiences in this context. But I just want to say this last thing before we go, and then I know it's going to open up a whole Pandora's box. Yeah, I think that it's going to get worse, and it's pretty bad right now. It's going to get worse, and I have always maintained that we should be able to be maximally prayerful, even if we are, let's say, minimalist in terms of our policies. And I believe that this moment, and we haven't done enough of this in the last couple of weeks, which is also I think makes sense. That we will be continuing to pray for all the innocents in Gaza and wherever they are. We will reinstate that to some degree. I think that it's been absent the last couple of weeks, and I think that was frankly because my own heart and for others, I think that we needed to be singing the song of the people, right? And I think there's room here for us to continue to hope and pray for a solution that will end the bloodshed as quickly as possible, and also maintain sanctity, the safety and sanctity of our Israeli brothers and sisters.
Amen.
And I think that I want us to be careful with the way that people speak about what's happening. I want to say that there is no context. There is no context. And that when people bring in the settlements and what's going on in the West Bank in some way as a part of what's happening now in Gaza, I find it to be incredibly inappropriate. I find it to be very hurtful and offensive to me. Israel was at war before 67. There were There have been wars that had nothing to do with Gaza and had nothing to do with the West Bank. There's when we're hearing people in the streets now screaming about from the sea, river to the sea, there'll be a free Palestine. They're not talking about what's happening in the settlements. And so I want to be really, really careful with the way that we monitor these conversations. This is a community that believes in peace. This is a community that believes that a two-state solution, a viable Palestinian state living alongside a viable, state of Israel is the only way forward for these two peoples. This is a community that has always prayed for the innocents and will continue to pray for the innocents. This is a community that makes no apologies for being a Zionist community, at least under my watch. That makes no apologies for putting Jews first and privileging Jews, right? There's nothing wrong with privileging your family. In fact, I would say there's something wrong with not privileging your family, right? As opposed to Peter Berger and other philosophers, I think privileging your family is actually a sign of deep humanism. And I think there's nothing wrong also with screaming from the rooftops to anybody that would say that there's nothing wrong also with mentioning and praying for and feeling a kinship with innocent civilians and praying for there to be an end to this conflict. So I think that my heart's with people, and I also have enough room in my heart for people who disagree with me to privately come in and talk to me and discuss it. And I just pray that Hashem may God give strength to us, to this nation. And also, Adonai Yivarech et Amo B'Shalom, may God also bless us with what we want more than anything that should be. Shabbat shalom.
Ken Yehi Ratzon.
Very blessed to have David as our